Good afternoon, and welcome to the June webinar on Nebraska's Economic Forecast. This forecast is for the rest of 2017 and also for the years 2018 and 2019. So it's a 3-year forecast for Nebraska's economy, and it's presented by the Bureau of Business Research, which is part of the College of Business Administration at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. My name is Eric Thompson. I'm the director of the Bureau of Business Research as well as an associate professor of economics here at UNL. I should also say that the report itself, the forecast itself that we're going to show you here in the next few minutes, is a product of both the Bureau of Business Research and the Nebraska Business Forecast Council, the latter group being a group of economists in the university, state government, and state utilities who come together twice a year to develop this 3-year forecast for the Nebraska economy. So the members of the Nebraska Business Forecast Council include myself, Dr. David Rosenbaum of the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Dr. Brad Lubin of the Department of Agricultural Economics at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln, Dr. John Austin, who's retired from the Bureau of Business Research at the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. From the state of Nebraska, we have Phil Baker from the Nebraska Department of Labor, Dr. Dave Dearmont from the Nebraska Department of Economic Development, and then we have Ken Lemke and Scott Lasecki from the Nebraska Public Power District. So I want to thank all of those members of our Nebraska Business Forecast Council for helping develop the forecasts I'm going to present to you here in a moment. We're going to have a PowerPoint presentation going through the various elements of the forecast. Before I get started with that, though, I want to mention a few other features of our webinar presentation. You can see we have several windows on your screen. In the lower right part of your screen, we have what's known as a chat window. So you would be able to chat during the PowerPoint presentation with any of the other individuals who have joined the webinar today, our attendees at the webinar today. So I encourage you to do so, especially if you see a name that you recognize. Those attendees are listed in the central right part of your screen. In addition to that, we have a question and answer window. That's in the bottom center part of your screen. So during the webinar presentation, as we're going through the PowerPoint, or at any time during the webinar, you can go ahead and type in a question. I will be answering those questions at the end of the webinar once we're done with the PowerPoint presentation. Sometimes people like to type in their question at the end as well, but you feel free. You can type in your question at any point during the webinar. The last feature we have with the webinar is we do have a few poll questions. This time we'll have 2 poll questions that we ask the webinar attendees. So we have a few general questions about key trends in the Nebraska economy. We try to get your opinion on that subject, and then afterwards we provide some information answering that poll question. So you can see the first poll question there. I'll prompt you to go ahead. You can answer now, or I'll prompt you to go ahead and answer a little bit later when we're getting closer to the part of the PowerPoint where we'll be able to present the answer. Anyway, with those points out of the way, I'm going to go ahead and start and go through our PowerPoint presentation on the Nebraska Economic Forecast for 2017 through 2019. Well, first, let's just have a brief outline, very simple outline for the presentation today. Only 2 elements. The first that we're going to present before the Nebraska Economic Forecast, we're going to present a U.S. economic forecast. So Nebraska has a very diversified economy, very linked in with the national economy, very linked in with the global economy. So I can't really do a presentation or a forecast for the Nebraska economy without first telling you about my assumptions and my outlook for the U.S. economy. Obviously, the Nebraska economy has unique features, doesn't always go in lockstep with the U.S. economy, but it does tend to follow it. I like to say that the growth of the U.S. economy sets something of a speed limit for the growth of the Nebraska economy. And so it's important to know, is the U.S. economy going to be growing very rapidly over the next few years? Is it going to grow at a moderate pace? Is it going to be slow U.S. growth? Because those things will affect the Nebraska Economic Outlook. Okay, so let's start with that U.S. forecast. We're going to talk about the strengths of the U.S. economy, the weaknesses of the U.S. economy, and the bottom line, what does it mean for U.S. economic growth? Starting with the strengths. This has been true for several years now, but given the upheaval of the Great Recession and the weak economy over the last 10 years, it's always important to point this out that, hey, we have now achieved a self-sustaining recovery in the U.S. economy. So we're not getting growth because of government fiscal spending and things like that. We're getting growth because the economy is now on a self-sustaining path. So because of job growth over a number of years, we have growing real wages, which supports growth in consumer spending on things like housing. And in the last few months, we've even seen a pickup in business investment, so getting more demand from the business sector as well. So a self-sustaining recovery for the U.S. economy. That's certainly a strength we have right now. Something new is we seem to now be benefiting from improved economies in Europe and Asia. So the Chinese economy has been growing a little faster after a period of slower growth, and the European economy has been growing faster. I think the best example of that is a report that came out about a week ago that was about the Greek economy. So as those of you following the news over the last decade know, the Greek economy has really struggled and been in almost a depression for much of that time. And so last week there was another surprise with the Greek economy, but this time the surprise was positive. They had been expecting the Greek economy to be in a recession the last quarter and actually got a positive surprise that it actually grew and avoided recession. So if the Greek economy is doing better, I think that should build your confidence that the European economy, especially Germany, France, other parts of northern Europe, are doing better. Another real positive or strength for the economy is two of the key prices in the economy are staying low, which helps a lot of businesses. In particular, we have low oil prices because of the strong exploration and fracking sector here in the United States. I think global oil prices are going to stay low during this forecast period, and that's obviously helpful for a lot of consumers and a lot of businesses. And it seems to be happening in a way now that'll even allow for some expansion of the U.S. energy industry, so including oil production. So that's a positive for our country's economy. Also, appears interest rates are going to stay low. They did run up a little bit after the U.S. election, but now they've returned down to the levels they were at before the U.S. presidential election, suggesting that those basic economic forces, higher savings in many parts of the world, less demand for money, even income inequality is tending to lead to more savings and therefore lower interest rates. And so those fundamental economic issues seem to be in place to keep rates low as well. So low oil prices, low interest rates obviously are positive for the expansion of some businesses. And we've made a lot of progress in the first half of the year in terms of deregulation in the United States. And that's a positive strength for economic growth as well. Deregulation of both environmental policy, the labor market, including healthcare, and financial deregulation. Well, let's look at some of the weaknesses that the U.S. economy faces. We do have an aging workforce with that baby boom generation increasingly reaching retirement age. You have more people exiting the workforce every year as a result. So net labor force growth, entrants minus exits from the labor force, is slowing. Obviously, labor, human capital is the key to one of the key inputs to the economy. If that's growing slowly, it does tend to tamp down overall economic growth in the U.S. economy. We also have some increasing evidence of some challenges with workforce quality in the United States. There's a growing bifurcation in the middle class in the U.S. economy. Now, some of that is middle class people moving up to the upper middle class, people with technical skills and so forth, achieving that success. But the other part of it is increasing number of people falling from the middle class to the lower middle class. And that's partly related to challenges in workforce quality and productivity, not quite as strong as it was in earlier generations. So that's an issue. Now, with our slower growing labor force, one way to improve that would be improve labor force growth would be through, of course, legal immigration, increased legal immigration. However, more recently, there's been a reduction in legal immigration in the U.S., and of course, that's a decision we need to make as a society, what we want to do, how many immigrants we want to have. But a reduction in the rate of legal immigration will tend to contribute to the slower growth of our labor force and be a little bit of a negative for economic growth. The other thing is I guess we haven't made quite as much progress on economic policy as we might have hoped this year. So plans for tax reform, there's some ideas out there, but they're still pretty unsettled. There doesn't seem to be a unified plan for federal tax reform, and it's unclear what we're ultimately going to get, certainly during 2017. So that's a bit of a weakness now, or I guess an absence of a strength we were expecting to have. Another weakness is there are no plans for a reform of those key entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare. Those are really drivers of the long-run deficit in the U.S. economy. Unless those are reformed, I think a lot of people, a lot of businesses are going to worry about long-run deficits, long-run growth of spending by the federal government in the United States, and that just creates some uncertainty with people, particularly wondering, well, what are tax rates going to look like in the future if we don't reform these entitlement programs? Obviously, that can affect things like investment. So without plans to build confidence by informing our entitlement programs, that's a bit of a negative for economic growth. But we had a lot of strengths, too, if you remember the last slide. So what's the bottom line when you put it all together? Well, I think we will be able to maintain our moderate growth in GDP at the federal level and good solid job growth as well. And again, it's due to a mixed bag of issues. Domestic workforce issues that I discussed are going to be a little bit of a drain on growth, but we do have positives like the stronger growth in Europe and China and those low prices for energy and money. The new policy proposals, those tend to be more of a pointing towards moderate growth because they're still kind of a mixed bag. We've made some progress in terms of deregulation, but haven't made progress on some of the other areas such as tax reform, and in fact aren't planning to make progress on the key issue of entitlement reform. So with the very mixed situation overall, it suggests moderate economic growth in the U.S. over the next 3 years. So that's the speed limit that Nebraska faces when we think about Nebraska's economic growth. Well, let's talk about that. To talk about growth in the Nebraska economy, it's important, first of all, to look at the key industries. So there's at least 3 key industries that drive the growth of the Nebraska economy. We like to focus on 3 of those industries. The first is the agricultural production complex. So that's a long-winded phrase, but the point we're trying to make is that we're not just talking about farming and ranching, although those are critical. We're talking about the key industries that supply farmers and ranchers and the key industries that process agricultural commodities. Taking that all together, that's really the heart of the Nebraska economy in a lot of ways. We also have the transportation industry. So if you compare Nebraska to other states, we have almost twice the share of our workforce involved in the transportation industry, whether that's trucking, rail, related warehousing. Almost twice the share as the typical state. So transportation is a big industry in Nebraska. We're obviously a rail center, but we're also the center for at least two major trucking firms as well. And then lastly, the insurance industry. And Nebraska's been a center for the insurance industry for decades and decades, and it's also a key, certainly a high-paying industry. Tends to be a little bit focused in the metropolitan areas of the state. So let's look at the prospects for those 3 key industries. For agriculture, I always like to start with a little discussion of the long run. We know there's some challenges in ag right now for the near term, but the long run picture is still very strong. Nebraska has at least two very important things going for it that should keep it a growing agricultural state in the future. The first is that Nebraska quite simply has a production cluster in agriculture. Much like the Silicon Valley has a production cluster in information technology and high technology, has a lot of key industries and different segments of technology. Nebraska is the same way with agriculture. We're very strong in a diverse and interrelated group of agricultural industries. So the Nebraska Department of Ag a few years ago put out a list stating that Nebraska was number one in irrigated acres, number one in commercial red meat production, cattle on feed numbers, number two in corn-based ethanol production, corn grain, soybean production among the leading states, as well as hay, strong in hog and pig slaughtering and hog and pig raising. Could do a little bit more in terms of raising, but the point is we have a diverse and strong agricultural production cluster. These industries are interrelated, and so this becomes a great place to invest because you're near to your suppliers, you're near to your customers. That's just a big asset for our ag industry over the long run. The other thing we have, quite simply, is we got the Ogallala Aquifer. You can see just by this map that a large share of the Ogallala Aquifer, in terms of the acres it covers, is in Nebraska. And the other key point is we have a very healthy aquifer in Nebraska. So Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, the aquifer is getting quite low, not able to contribute as much to irrigation as it has in the past, much less so, actually. In Nebraska, we have a much healthier, recharging aquifer. We do need to cut back here and there on irrigation, but by and large, we can continue to be, for decades to come, a place where irrigation is sustainable. That's a big positive for businesses thinking about it, making an investment in agribusiness, to know that in Nebraska, we're always going to have a crop, rain or shine. Maybe not the whole crop. Droughts are still a big problem in the state, but even in a dry year, we're still going to have a pretty good crop here in Nebraska. That's a tremendous advantage to get more investment in the ag industry here in our state. So because of those two reasons, the cluster, the aquifer, the long-run prospects for Nebraska agriculture are quite strong. However, we do know that we have some short-term challenging conditions. We've had a drop in farm income over the last 4 years. Now, it did start at record levels, so it's dropped from record levels all the way back to more normal levels, and then unfortunately past those normal levels, and it's been a little bit low in recent years. So that's a problem. Now, the good news is coming. We think that agricultural commodity prices have now stabilized here in 2017. They may not rise much, but at least they've stopped falling in terms of crop and livestock prices. But without an increase in prices, obviously there's going to be a limit to how much farm income can grow.
Yep, I'm getting that. Yeah, I'm getting that.
Sorry for that interruption. We'll proceed with the webinar now. Another negative we face here in 2017 for farm income is there'll probably be a decline in federal support for agriculture, federal transfer payments through the agricultural support coverage and price loss coverage programs. Basically, the support levels in those programs are set on a rolling average of prices and yields. And as we move farther and farther away from those high prices in 2011, 2013, that rolling average is declining and the support level is declining. Another I wouldn't call this a negative, but just a fact of life. There were very high yields in Nebraska ag in 2016. We think that those yields will return to trend. And so that means a little bit less revenue if yields are strong, are solid rather than strong. So all of that suggests then there'll be a little bit of a further drop off in farm income here in 2017, although we do think this is the year when farm incomes bottom out. So here is our outlook for farm income in Nebraska. We think farm income is $4.4 billion in 2016, again, partly due to those strong harvests. We believe it'll fall to $3.7 billion this year, 2017, so unfortunately another year of decline. However, it should bounce back, get some of that back in 2018 and 2019 and make it all the way back to $4.2 billion in 2019, so pretty close to the 2016 level. So I would call farm income in Nebraska stable, but not a source of growth. I'm now able to ask the first poll question. Why, you'll see this in a minute, why is job growth stalled in the Nebraska transportation industry? So if you look over the last few decades, that was a source of real job growth in Nebraska, trucking and rail. Why has that job growth stalled? So you see you have a few choices there. Is it because of labor shortages that are affecting the industry? Is it because of weak demand for coal by electric utilities? You know, we haul a lot of coal through the state on trains. Or are both factors having a significant effect? So think about your answer, and we'll get back to answering the poll question here in a minute. Go ahead and vote. Okay, let's talk about the transportation sector. Again, maybe some challenges now. We'll talk about that in a minute, but it has some real long-run strengths as well. We have a strong ag sector that involves a lot of hauling things around, so that's a positive for our agricultural, for our transportation industry in terms of employment. We're on Interstate 80. That's kind of a booming corridor for transportation. All the states along Interstate 80, especially between Chicago and Denver, have seen growth in their transportation and trucking industry. Certainly Iowa has as well. So that's a positive for us. We are a rail industry center with a major presence, including the headquarters in one case, but a major presence from two of the four large national railroads. And obviously we have at least two nationally leading trucking companies. And just more generally, we have a very skilled workforce for rail, obviously, but also for trucking. And a lot of entrepreneurship, new companies being formed, especially in trucking. And so those are our big advantages for transportation. And, of course, we have a lot of advantages for insurance as well. Because the industry has been present here, we have a very qualified workforce. A lot of states you couldn't find an abundant group of skilled insurance workers, but if you want to expand here in Nebraska, that workforce is present. We have a lot of excellent training programs. I'll shout out the actuarial science program here at UNL, preparing people for careers in the insurance industry. And obviously we've designed our policies in the state to be supportive of the insurance industry since it's been such a major industry here for so long. So all three of our key industries have things going for them that should really pay off in the long run. However, in the case of agriculture, there are some near-term challenges. I would say the same is true of transportation as well. Here now you can see the detailed forecast for two of our key industries here in Nebraska, transportation and warehousing. That data is reported together. You can see over the last decade, from 2007 to 2016, we actually lost 4,000 jobs in transportation and warehousing, including 2,000 jobs just last year. So the industry has been under a little pressure. Now, we are expecting growth over the next 3 years, but just 500 new jobs by 2019. So that's why I say that job growth, at least, has stalled in the Nebraska transportation industry. The reason for that is both, if you look at the poll question. There are labor shortages that clearly affect the trucking industry. It's just hard to find people that want to work as long-haul truckers. Being away from home in the evenings sometimes. Obviously, that's a negative with that occupation. And then Nebraska has a big demand for long-haul truckers, so it's sometimes hard to find enough people. So labor shortages are a real issue. We are affected by some of the changes in the electric utility industry and the declining demand for coal within the electric utility industry. We're a huge railroad state. We're right next to the major Wyoming coal mines. We haul a lot of coal. And as that has become less in demand, the burning and hauling of coal, that has impacted employment in our rail industry. So the best answer would be both, although you wouldn't be wrong if you had picked labor shortages or weak demand for coal. Financial services is a large diversified sector that includes insurance as well as banking and real estate. Now, the growth prospects are a little stronger there. You can see between 2007 and 2016, we added almost 5,000 jobs, and we expect to add another 2,200 jobs over the next 3 years. Now, part of that will be growth in banking and finance, but we are expecting stability and perhaps a little growth in our key insurance sector as well. Let's move along and talk about some of the other details of our forecast. Before we do that, though, let's ask the second poll question. So I talked a little bit about some of the challenges in agriculture over the next few years, not long run. Long run looks great, but over the next few years. Talked a little bit about some of the challenges transportation is facing, at least in terms of job growth. So that leads to the following question. Will real per capita income, so real, by real we mean inflation adjusted per capita income, rise or fall in Nebraska over the next 3 years? Again, several of our key sectors are expected to be a little sluggish over the next few years, so will we still be able to grow real per capita income during the period? So you can vote rise, fall, you can vote unchanged, which will include pretty close to unchanged. So those are your three choices. So think about your answer, and we'll provide some information about that in just a moment. Okay, but let's get into some more detail about our economic outlook, our industry employment outlook. Now, one of the strong sectors in the Nebraska economy over the next 3 years will be the construction sector. Didn't add a lot of jobs over the last decade from 2007 to 2016, but we expect construction to add 4,500 jobs or 1,500 jobs per year over the next 3 years. So we have a little bit of a turnaround in housing, obviously, especially in the cities, Omaha and Lincoln, but also in select towns and small cities, especially where they're making a concerted effort to build more housing for their workforce. So some of that, obviously when you build those new neighborhoods, there needs to be some commercial development to support those residences. In any case, as you'll see in a minute, we've got strong growth in service employment. I already showed you the strong growth in finance employment. So there's just a need for more office space in the state. So that also drives that commercial construction industry. So we got pretty strong residential construction, pretty strong commercial construction industry, and we're investing more in road building here in Nebraska. So put that all together, strong construction growth over the next 3 years. We're even expecting to add a few manufacturing jobs over the next 3 years, about 2,000 jobs. About half of that will be due to our new poultry processing plant in Fremont. That's expected to come online, I think, by 2019. But we have some other opportunities in agricultural processing that will benefit the state, and hopefully we'll see a little bit of a rebound in the ag equipment industry as farm income stabilizes and grows a little bit, and as older equipment starts to wear out. So even some good news in manufacturing, and of course a lot of job growth in services. You can see the services sector, which includes healthcare, it includes restaurants, lodging, and other parts of the entertainment industry. It includes a key sector called business services, accountants, computer programmers, consultants, architects, lawyers, people whose primary customers are other businesses whose primary customers are other businesses. That's a relatively high-wage industry, and that's growing very fast as well. So we think services can grow by about 1.5% per year in terms of jobs and create about 6,000 Nebraska jobs each of the next 3 years. So actually more than half of our job growth will be in the services sector. Okay, so what's the bottom line here? How will Nebraska do in terms of job growth? We think job growth will be about 1% per year over the next 3 years, a little stronger in 18 and 19 than during 2017. So a good solid rate of growth. Now, it will be a little bit less than the U.S. growth during that period. The biggest difference is in 2017. I think that's partly the result of some success we've had here in Nebraska. Since the Great Recession ended, our economy has been relatively strong. We've really recovered from the Great Recession in many ways. Some other parts of the country have as well. But if you look at the country as a whole, there's still big states that have not fully recovered from the Great Recession. In the Southwest, Arizona, Nevada, the Central Valley of California, some of the states in the Southeast. So there's parts of the country where they still need to put people back to work after the Great Recession. And they just have a little bit more capacity to grow because they've still got people that need to be absorbed back in the labor market. We have a few of those in Nebraska as well, but we've largely recovered from the Great Recession. So for that reason, growth will be a little stronger in the U.S. in 2017. But by the time you get to 2019, we should do just about as well as the nation in terms of job growth. And thankfully, the U.S. should be fully recovered from the Great Recession by then as well. Probably a little slower because, again, our population growth slightly lags the U.S. population growth. Let's look at several of the other key indicators, and in doing so, we'll answer our second poll question. So you see here the outlook in Nebraska for key indicators such as non-farm personal income, taxable sales, CPI, the inflation rate, and population. So non-farm personal income, farm income will be kind of weak, but non-farm personal income will grow at a good 4% clip over the next 3 years. We'll get back to taxable sales in a minute. Now you can see there CPI. What's the inflation rate going to be? So if you subtract the inflation rate from the rate of growth of non-farm personal income, you kind of get a real personal income growth rate. You can see that is about 1.5 to 2.2%, depending on the year. And if you subtract from that the population growth rate, then you get to our poll question. What is the real per capita income growth going to be? It's going to be we estimate about 0.7% in 2017 and 1.5% in 2019. So solid growth in real per capita income here in Nebraska, a real increase in the standard of living, and a real sustained economic recovery. So that's the positive news. So I see people were kind of split. Most of you had rise or unchanged, and that hopefully will turn out to be correct. That's our expectation. Now, as you can see, with non-farm income growth, we should get growth in taxable sales. Obviously, farm income plays a role there as well. And you can see that in 2017, we already have some data for the first few months of the year. It's been a little weak in terms of taxable sales. And farm income is going to be down slightly as well. So we're expecting a weaker year in terms of taxable retail sales, but we should have a full bounce back in 2018 and 2019. Again, taxable sales doesn't grow quite as fast as personal income because people are spending more and more of their income on services which are not subject to sales tax, by and large. Well, those are the key points we wanted to make about the Nebraska Economic Forecast outlook. And I certainly appreciate each of you taking some time this afternoon to attend our webinar. Sorry that we blanked out there for a minute, but thank you for your patience waiting for us to get back online. I'm going to go ahead and see if we have any questions here. Not too late. Feel free to type in a question. While you're doing that, I'll let you know how you can stay in touch with BBR. We produce 2 to 3, sometimes 4 reports on the Nebraska economy each month. You can follow us on social media. You can see our relevant information for Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter. You can also subscribe to our e-newsletter. So we basically will send you a little email with a link to a report. You can subscribe to that by sending your preferred email address to bbr@unl.edu. So I'll just wait a moment here to see what questions we have. So overall growth for the year. Let me go ahead and answer that first question, the rate of overall growth for the year. So you saw, I think in some of the numbers we presented, that we'll have decent growth in non-farm income and employment in Nebraska in 2017. Now, if you add in the expected drop in farm income, then overall income growth will be a little slower, around, I think, 3.1% if you add the two rates together in the appropriate fashion. So that's a little slower than we would hope for, and you could see that the job growth was slightly slower as well at 0.9% rather than 1.1%. So the fact that agriculture is still adjusting does slow our economic growth somewhat, although I think we're still experiencing moderate economic growth, but a little slower here in 2017 relative to 2018 and 2019. Second question, would repeal of universal health care be positive for business? So one guest asked that. We made the point earlier that deregulation should be positive for economic growth. A straight repeal of the regulations associated with, I assume this was referring to the Affordable Care Act, would be positive for business. Now, of course, we're talking about repeal and replace, so it's important to, in that case, to replace the Affordable Care Act with a new approach or new act that reflects good economic policy as well. So be careful about how much people are being subsidized and so forth. But with that caveat said, yes, I think we've argued throughout the webinar and throughout our forecast that deregulation should be a positive for economic growth. Another question from Mitch. Where do you see the biosciences cluster going? Well, I think the bioscience cluster to some extent in Nebraska is actually related to our ag industry. It's obviously also related to medical research, and we have some important strengths in that here in Nebraska as well, especially in the Omaha area, also in Lincoln. But if you widen it to include the ag part of biosciences, we're strong in many areas of the state. And I think biosciences are part of the long run story for Nebraska agriculture. That's one of those key service providers, suppliers to agriculture that tends to concentrate in Nebraska along with the rest of the industry. And as our healthcare industry continues to grow, our teaching hospitals continue to thrive. There's a lot of research going on there as well. That'll also be helpful for the biosciences cluster. So I don't think it'll be a huge share of Nebraska growth, but it will be a source of growth in entrepreneurship and high-wage employment here in our state. Another question by Tim Stewart. Why are income tax revenues lagging? There's some evidence that income tax revenues are lagging due to expectations about lower future income tax rates, especially for higher income earners. So there may be some pressure on income taxes in the early part of this year or in 2017 as people who have the ability to do so are shifting their income tax burden to future years, hoping that rates will be lower in those future years. And there are some plans to lower rates. So that could be one factor. Another factor could be agriculture. So the profitability level in agriculture is not what it was a few years ago with farm incomes under pressure. Some of the service providers to agriculture, equipment dealers and so forth aren't earning high incomes like they used to. And obviously if the incomes are falling for high income earners who pay a higher rate or a high rate, effective rate, that could put some pressure on income tax revenues as well. But again, those things are part of a cyclical phenomenon that shouldn't be permanent if we continue to get real income growth. Second question from Mitch, the second last question. Oh, that seems to be a repeat. Okay. Do you find there's a relationship between workforce supply in medical sciences, ag, or others, and economic growth. Yes, so Nebraska and many states, this is true of, really throughout the United States, there are issues with skills gaps. So obviously one effect of the Great Recession, it didn't just cause the economy to shrink, it caused the economy to change. And some of our large growing industries before the Great Recession came out of the recession smaller and not really growing very fast anymore, whereas other new industries emerged. So, and this happens in all the large recessions. The recession of the early 80s, it happened as well. There's kind of a mismatch between the skills that new businesses need and the skills that some of the workers have from the old economy. And so these skills mismatches can affect growth. Obviously, the high level of skill, specialized skill needing in some of the medical sciences, the biosciences part, many of the occupations in agriculture, highly specialized skills in many ways. If those aren't sufficient, it'll slow economic growth. That is something we are affected by here in Nebraska, but I don't think it's just Nebraska. I think it's in many states. Well, what a great group of questions. I appreciate those. Thank you so much again for your time this afternoon. Feel free to contact us at bbr@unl.edu if you have any further questions you'd like to ask. And we were so pleased to present our forecast to you here today.